Hey there, it's Leonardo here. Today I'm breaking down a dreamy indie rock alternative song inspired by bands like Boygenius, Manchester Orchestra, and similar. Here's a quick snippet of the song so you can get an idea.
But this is crashing down, crashing down, crashing down. Then your voice just disappeared through the ghosts of humans here. And time again, I thought that
I'll walk you through the entire process from the very first sketch and song idea through the arrangement, production, and mixing and mastering phase. And along the way, I'll share tips and tricks that you can use in your own songwriting, production, and mixing too. So without any further ado, let's jump into the doll. I'm going to show you the first sketch that I created for the song. And then I started singing on top of it, and I came up with the melodies for the verse at first. I thought this was the verse initially when I was creating it, but then I later repurposed it as the pre-chorus, and I created a new melody for the verse. And then I started jamming on top of the drum loop in the chorus. This is something that I like doing, and I find it helpful creatively when writing melodic ideas. I write a sketch of a piano or just some instrument to give myself some harmony for the verse, and then I let the chorus empty. Like I leave only the drums in the chorus when I'm writing the melody. And so you get something like this. And then you just have a rhythmic idea to support your melodic ideas when you're creating the melody for the chorus. So that you can take advantage of the fact that you have some harmonic foundation that are working as a backbone in your song, but then when you come to the chorus, you don't have any predefined harmony that is making your melody more predictable. You're sort of free to improvise some melodies that might not come up if you already have predefined harmony going on. For the song, luckily, it didn't take much to come up with a decent melody. So as you can see, I haven't really done a lot of takes. The first 3 to 4 takes, maybe 5 or 6, are the most inspired ones. If I have to really do a lot of takes in order to find a decent starting point for a good melody, it means that usually the groove and the harmonic backbone I laid out aren't really that inspiring to me. And it almost never happens that I find a good melody after like looping the thing for like 5 to 6 or 7 takes. I find myself entering in a different sort of mental space where the inspiration goes out and sort of it becomes like not fun, but also the results are not good. So what I tend to do is I will just go ahead and like change the drum groove, change the harmony part, or add other instruments that might add some variety and might help me come up with some less predictable melodic ideas. This is basically the initial sketch. I'll let you listen to it once. That's not even singing probably. I'm just mumbling around melodic ideas that pop up in my head until I find a good one. So the next step was adding the harmony for the chorus. So I came up with this piano part that is just, again, a sketch for a chord progression that fit the melody I came up with.
disappeared through the ghosts of humans here.
So that was the sketch of the song. After that, I started like refining all the parts, I added the verse, which wasn't there initially because what I thought was the verse ended up being the pre-chorus. I added a drum groove for the verse, and then I added the melody, and then I started recording all the instruments, bass, guitar, pianos, and I added some synth parts too. So first of all, I want to show you the drums because that's one of the most important parts in any productions, I think. So as you see, I'm using Superior Drummer. Here it is. I'm using this independent kit with this hybrid rock setting. I think I have tweaked something here. Not a lot though. It sounds pretty good as a starting point. So one thing for this genre, I think it's important to like always program drums in a way that sounds human. One of the important thing, to me at least, is to avoid like the insanely hard hits like 127 velocity, because they easily end up sounding unnatural. When they play, drummers don't tend to hit as hard. The other thing is using some human-made MIDI loops. For this one, I use some grooves from Superior Drummer, and then you can edit them as you want, really. But you have a backbone of something played by a human. So this is how it sounds. Regarding the mixing of the drums, I tend to mix top-down, like many people say. Top-down mixing means you're doing most of the processing on the bus and much less processing on the individual channels. On top of that, just keep in mind that you're listening everything going on through my master chain, which is actually two chain. One chain for the instrumental bus, which is this one, where all the instruments but the vocals are processed together really. There's some hardware stuff going on here. And then on the master bus, where all the instruments like feed into, I have two other chains. One with a couple of hardware pieces, then it goes back into the DAW, and then out again, a couple of other hardware pieces, and then back into the DAW for the final limiting stage. So you're actually listening to everything with the master bus processing on. So that makes a big difference. If I mute it, just to give you an idea. That's how I mix most of the stuff nowadays. I start mixing and I start producing not from the sketching phase, but after I've done the initial sketch, then I turn on my master bus and my instrumental bus chains so that all the decisions that I make from that point on take into account the processing going on the master buses, basically. To me, that's important because it makes a lot of difference in sound and it makes it easier to mix, because everything sounds more polished since the beginning. Like you don't have to do as much tweaking on the individual channels. That doesn't mean that as you turn on the master bus, everything sounds perfect. Not at all. You have to compensate for some stuff. And of course, you still have to do quite a lot of processing on the subgroups and on the individual channels, but it really makes my life easier and I like the sound of the master chain. So here's the processing that I'm doing on the drum bus. Basically, there's some SSL style compression initially, then saturating it a little bit with this plugin here. And this other plugin is both an equalizer and a saturation plugin. It's sort of like a frequency dependent saturator, meaning you can choose to saturate differently the high end or choose to saturate only the low end or only the mid and everything in between. Then I added this R bass, which tightens up the very low end. It's set up at like 60 Hertz, which is the very bottom of the kick drum. And after the R bass, there's an hardware insert, which is like a 33609 clone, the one made by Behringer, which sounds surprisingly well given how much it costs. Like it costs like 10 times less than the original and it sounds amazing. It sounds way better than a plugin. It's compressing 3 to 4 dBs, not doing a ton, but if I take it off, you'll listen. There's quite a lot less snap on the drums. Then there are two stages of saturation after that, and one is with this plugin here, and the other is like a sort of a tape saturator. Then on top of the processing on the drum bus itself, there's also some processing on the kick and snare bus. I'm using this plugin here on the kick. There's like a little bit of saturation, a little bit of compression. Same plugin on the snare, a little bit more saturation and some EQ and some compression too. Then on the kick bus, there's also this compressor here that it's actually controlled by the snare. So when the snare hits, the kick gets turned down in volume a little bit. And that's because there's this part in the chorus that, as you can hear, the kick and the snare are playing at unison. When the snare and the kick play at the same time, the peak volume, the transient, gets quite louder than like the normal level they usually have. So on the master bus, stuff started to behave a little bit too aggressively. The compressor started to compress too much. And so I decided to tame the kick transient when the snare hits. And so there's not as much extra peak level going on. Then last thing for the kick bus, there's this mid-frequency boost that happens only in the chorus. There's an automation that turns this insert on and off, and it just gives a little bit more tip to the kick drum in the chorus. And then regarding the snare bus, there is this plugin that I've shown you before, and there are a couple of transient designers. This one is not actually doing much. So this is mostly it for the drums. There are two other channels that have some processing too. And these are external reverb units that I have printed. And one is the Meris Mercury X pedal for vocals and drums. It sounds really cool to me. And then there's this TC Electronic M1 that I use for some room reverb type of sound. There's only kick and snare going to it. And here's the Meris. Pretty dry, right? By the way, I know that some of you who are producing music are struggling with one thing, which is, how do I know when to make a certain decision or the opposite decision? Like, for example, how do I know if the vocals is too loud or too low? How do I know if the snare is too bright or too dark? That's sort of the question that most people who are starting to produce music or who are not as experienced in producing music are asking themselves, right? And I'm finding that the most common answer to that is, well, you just feel it, right? You just feel when something is too loud or it's too low, when something is too bright or too dark, and so on and so forth. And yeah, it's true. The problem is I'm not finding anything that's really teaching how to develop the critical listening skills required so that you can feel it, right? Because when you're starting out, you don't actually feel it. Otherwise, people wouldn't struggle with that stuff. I think this is something that's missing because the vast majority of tutorials online are just sharing mixing tricks, production tricks. They are useful too. I mean, I'm not saying they are not useful, but they are not solving this specific problem. For this reason, I'm working on a system, on a method to develop your ear so that you can start making those choices by feeling them, exactly like the pros describe they do. If that sounds useful to you, or also if it doesn't, and you think that you have already solved those problems with other stuff, please let me know in the comments. It really helps me prioritize what to put out next. Let's now talk about the other instruments, starting with the bass, and let's go section by section so that I can also show you the layers of the arrangement. The bass I used is a Fender Jazz Player bass. I used the XFX3 to record it. This is the patch that I used. This bass head model with an Ampeg cab and some like heavy compression on it, and then a multi-band compression on it. And it's sort of the same patch when I played it with fingers and when I use the pick. And then on top of the processing that happened in the XFX, there's also this compressor here, which is just touching 1 or 2 dBs of compression. And that's it for the start of the song. It's just bass, drums, and vocals.
Our photos bleaching in the sun.
For the verse, the main guitar part is this arpeggio that I made using the Fender Jaguar, going into a Boss compressor pedal, and then into a GHS 424 pedal, and I just recorded the DI signal coming out of it, and this is how it sounds. There's also some extra processing going on, which is this spring reverb and this compressor here. Together they sound like this. And then I added this sort of guitar amp layer, which is a little bit more fuzzy and distorted. So this is the only guitar part that plays in the first verse. Then we can move on to the pre-chorus. The bass doesn't change much. Drum starts playing like a normal like groove, kick, snare, and hi-hat. There are a few guitars playing here. All the guitars that I recorded for the pre-chorus, the chorus, and the bridge use either a Roland Jazz chorus amp model from the XFX or the Fender Bassman model. These are the only two amps I used. This is a Roland Jazz chorus model with a spring reverb before it and then a chorus after the cabinet. Then there's this muted part. Then there is this part here. And for this part, I used this patch here, which is a Bassman amp with a distortion pedal in front of it that goes into a delay. And then after the amp, there are some, like there is a reverb, fairly long tail reverb. And then there's also this delay, which is very washy and it kind of turns into a reverb too. So that's why you don't hear really a delay here. You hear more like a shimmery wash, and that's what I wanted to go for. This is basically the same patch, but with a tremolo at the end. And then I added this layer of guitars that are just for the top end, where I'm playing basically the highest strings. Of course, these two guitars alone sounds pretty awful, but then if you put them with those, very different sound and purpose together, right? Then there's this arpeggio here. Which is a Bassman amp with some sort of reverb and delay. And that's it for the guitars in the pre-chorus. There's just one extra instrument in the pre-chorus, which is this pad. It's a Virus TI pad. Then we go into the chorus. Drums stay very similar. And then the bass is picked instead of played with fingers. Then we have guitars also. Similar part as before. Instead of being muted, they are open chords in the chorus to give like some extra impact. Then there's this shimmery strum, which is very similar to the other XFX patch I shown you. It's just using an extra crystal echo effect. And then there's this part. This part can be kind of harsh on its own because there's a spring reverb before the amp, and then the amp is distorting the spring reverb. And this can emphasize a little bit too much the high frequencies, but if you put it together with this one, it sounds a lot more balanced. This gives the low end, and this gives the space from the spring reverb, and also an extra sizzle in the top end. Then we have this acoustic guitar. the cool thing is just the top end and the pick sound. And in the final mix, it has a role of a shaker. You can't really hear the body, but if you put together all the guitars, if I mute it, you lose quite a bit. Then we have the synths and the piano. So let's start with the piano part. So it's an upright piano patch. I EQ'd it quite significantly because I didn't want the low end of the piano to sum to the low end of the bass. So really you're just hearing the mid frequencies of the piano in the final mix. Then we have this pad, which is there mostly to have like an extra layer, some extra space in the chorus. Then there's this synth lead, which I played using the Moog Matriarch. So for this part, I wanted like a dirty and broken sound that it's usually not easy for me to find using VSTs, but the Matriarch is really meant for that. So that's it for the chorus. The only remaining part is the bridge. This is the drums for the bridge. The bass has the same sound as in the chorus. It plays straight 8 notes. Then there's a baritone guitar. There's some delay and some reverb on it. Then there's a lead sort of part that's meant to blend with the baritones. Then there are some strummed chords. And then the bends. And then there's this arpeggio. So together the guitars and the bridge sounds like this. The piano is doing just straight chords. And then we have like the same sort of Moog Matriarch lead that is playing a different melody, of course. And one thing I forgot about the Matrix sound is that I have these two plugins going on. This is a delay and this is like a Big Sky Cloud reverb, which is a very cool reverb algorithm, one of my favorites probably. They create really the sound because otherwise it's very dry. Right. Here I've added also like a lower octave. I just took the original sound and pitched it down with this plugin actually, and then added an extra octave lower. And that's it, it's just to fill it up a little bit. So that's it for the instrumental. There are a few additional things like guitar fills like this that happen in the second verse and second pre-chorus, but it's not a lot. I've added a few variations to the second verse and second pre-chorus to just create some more variety in the arrangement. Let's get to the vocals. Vocals have been recorded with Neumann TLM 103. The routing is pretty simple. We have like a track for the verse, a track for the chorus, and both are going to this bus, which is the vocal bus. Most of the processing again is happening on the bus. There's also this track, which is just a heavily affected part in the verse. The first plugin for all the vocal channels is this tuning plugin, which is actually doing very little. I didn't want vocals to sound unnatural or robotic in this song because, again, the genre requires natural sounding vocals. So it's just adding some extra polish. It's not doing much. Then we have this 1176 style compressor. Yeah,
Our
it's
photos
really
bleaching
compressing
in
quite
the
a bit.
sun.
So this is basically the processing for all the vocal channels. And then for the main vocals, we have the processing on the main vocal bus, a bit of de-essing, and then there's this compressor, which is modeled after a very old, kind of rare compressor, which, if I remember correctly, is like a very mu compressor, and it's like owned by Greg Wells, which is a renowned producer, and it's not doing much.
It's worn us down to
It's just
dust.
touching it and giving some extra saturation. Then we have a multiband. Then there is Gullfoss, which is a spectral equalizer, and it's evening out the frequencies even more than what the multiband can do. Then we have this one, Kelvin. It's a distortion saturation plugin, and after it there's another saturation plugin. These are used like lightly. This is like in parallel. It's only 37% wet. And then this one, it's not really distorting a lot. It's just adding some extra saturation. So here's the sound with all the plugins.
Voice just disappeared through the ghosts all humans hear.
As you can hear, like there is some saturation going on. When everything is playing, you don't really hear it as much, but it helps bringing the low level detail stuff up and makes the vocal sounds a lot more in your face. And this is without the plugins, and I will try to level match it here.
Voice just disappeared through the ghosts. All voice just disappeared through the ghosts all humans hear.
Then we have the backing vocals bus, and it's sort of the same thing. We have Gullfoss, we have the de-esser, and we have the multiband. And as you can see, there's no saturation on the backing vocals here. Sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't think it's necessary. Regarding the effects tracks for the vocals, I have 3 tracks that I've printed. It's actually 4 tracks that I've printed. That comes from the Meris Mercury X and the TC Electronic M1. One is sort of a micro pitch effect, sort of a doubler, and this is how it sounds alone.
Our photos bleaching in the sun.
And this is how it sounds with the vocals.
These lonely streets have worn us down to dust.
Very light effect that's just spreading out the vocal a little bit. And then there is the reverb. It's sort of a long reverb, but the cool thing about this reverb is that you can hear the delay repeats. So it's not like a super washy reverb that just has a long tail. It feels natural. It feels like it has that sort of unpredictability that the real world has. At the same time, it doesn't make the vocal too washed out. The vocal still remains in front of you. This is how it sounds.
Our photos bleaching in the sun.
This is without.
Our photos bleaching in the sun.
That's it for the verse. And then in the chorus, we have a delay. It adds a little bit of dreaminess. This is all about the sounds of the vocal. Let's see some of the vocal arrangement. In the verse, we have just one vocal track. In the chorus, we have the main vocal, which is the low octave. And then we have this high falsetto double.
Then your voice just disappeared through the ghost.
The same for the other choruses too. In the third chorus, in the last chorus, other parts come in.
Since your voice has disappeared through the ghost we all still hear. I keep dreaming.
We have a similar arrangement also in the bridge.
We're falling down and down and down.
Also here in the bridge we have this additional effects.
We're falling down and down and down.
which is sort of a weird effect. It's not super loud, but it adds some extra ambience. There's quite a lot of processing going on the master bus that I haven't talked about, and I haven't talked about the analog chains. Let me know in the comments if you want to know all that stuff, and I'll make a video on that. So let's give a final listen to this song from start to finish.
Our photos bleaching in the sun. These lonely streets have worn us down to dust. I always promised I'd be on your side, but this is crashing down, crashing down, crashing down. Then your voice just disappeared through the ghosts of humans here. Time and time again, I thought that you were here. All that I see is a pale disguise. The silence loves your darkest time. I always promised I'd be on your side, but this is crashing down, crashing down, crashing down. Then your voice just disappeared through the ghosts of humans here. Time and time again, I thought that you were here. We're falling down and down and down. The sky is bending into the ground. Since your voice has disappeared through the ghosts we all still hear, I keep dreaming the same again. Alive for you.
All right, that's it for today's breakdown. I hope you enjoyed it and you picked up some new ideas you can use in your own creative process. If you did, please hit subscribe so you won't miss the upcoming videos, and it will help grow the channel. Thank you very much. I'll see you in the next one.